The bloodiest countess in history, Elizabeth Bathory, with the modern obsession with the macabre becoming more and more popular. By the day, you've likely heard of this youth and beauty-obsessed Countess of Čachtice Castle, the inspiration for modern renditions of vampirism, a murderess, one of the first female serial killers in documented history. Elizabeth Bathory is constantly discussed in many circles with such a bloody history of torture and brutality. It's almost difficult to believe anyone could be so cruel as the Countess. Some historians today doubt the truth in history. We know of this horror story of European lineage, but we'll let you be the judge of that. Welcome to Dis to Your Being Past History. But first hit that like button to help us create more content for this degree. Daily life. Let's dive first into Bathory's background to understand where her penchant for violence started. Born Elizabeth Bathory. This is a Hungarian name on August 7th, 1560, to Baron Georgi Bathery VI from the Ext brand of the family, and the Baroness Anna Bathery from the Sommelier branch. The Batherys, like many other prominent noble families, often married with their own family, leading to mental illness and genetic disorders. For example, her uncle King Stephen Bathery of Poland had attacks of epilepsy, and his two brothers were well-known tyrants and criminals. His father used to take a sleigh in the middle of the summer. As a child, she suffered multiple epileptic seizures, violent mood swings, and painful migraines. By the time she was 4 or 5, on top of health problems from a young age, she was exposed to extreme brutality. In this era, nobility routinely beat servants. By the tender age of 6, Elizabeth watched the public execution of a local gypsy accused of kidnapping and selling children into slavery. The gypsy was sawn into a horse's stomach. Another violent act she witnessed was at 15, when Stephen Bathery ordered to cut off the ears and noses of local peasants in a fit of anger. This fueled the rebellion against him. In 1570, the 10-year-old was promised to Bathery, who was 5 years her senior, though they didn't wait until 3 years later. According to the custom, the young Elizabeth was sent to the court of her future mother-in-law to learn how to manage the house. A rumor spread that in 1574 she gave birth to an illegitimate child whose father was a local peasant. The child was born in secrets and handed over to a trusted woman who for a large sum was sent to Wallachia and told to never return to Transylvania. During Elizabeth's lifetime, the peasant father was allegedly charged with taking advantage of Bathery faring, had him castrated, and then promptly torn apart by dogs. A message to the young Bathery to never again allow this to happen in the most vicious manner he could manage. Finally, on May 8th, 1575, a glamorous wedding ceremony occurred at Vranov nad Tople Castle, Hungarian Verano. The celebrations lasted for 3 days, and as a wedding gift to his young bride, Count Ferenc Nadasdy gave her the Gothic castle of Čachtice, as well as the surrounding villages. The two lived in the Nadasdy family estate of Sava. This marriage was a binding of two strong families, now having ties in Transylvania and the Kingdom of Hungary. Though the Blood Countess didn't spend much time in the castle, she was gifted for her nuptials, particularly in winter, as the castle was uninhabitable. What a great gift! An uninhabitable castle. Married life. The young bride and her ambitious yet vicious husband shared 5 children. Anna, born 1585 or so, born 1590 Catalan, born 1594 Paul, born 1597, and Andres, born 1598, and possibly 2 more children, Miklos and Georgi, whose birth dates are unknown. The children, like their mother, had been raised by governesses. Unlike his bride, Count Ferenc Nadasdy couldn't read or write. He was well versed in military tactics and spent most of his life away on the battlefield. Elizabeth was in charge of managing their many estates and taking care of the villages of their territories. Chachtice is said to have schooled Elizabeth in the ways of torture, and the castle they shared became the site of numerous atrocities. Some historians claim that for Bathery's pleasure, Fry had a girl restrained, slathered in honey, and then ravaged by insects. He is also said to have gifted the Countess gloves, spiked with claws, which he used to trash her servants for their mistakes. Elizabeth's further corruption came from her Aunt Clara, who allegedly introduced her to secret parties of the carnal variety and a shadowy circle of people consisting of sorcerers, witches, and alchemists. After 29 long years together, Count Ferenc, Chachtice the Black Knight of Hungary, succumbed to a mysterious and sudden illness on the battlefield. The exact disease is unknown, and some speculated that Elizabeth was the cause of her husband's demise. However, what is known about the disease that killed the Count is that pain travelled along his lower limbs for at least 2 years, before eventually losing the use of his limbs and ultimately succumbing to the disease before his death. Ferenc entrusted his heirs and widow to Georgie Thorzo, who would investigate Bathery's crimes later widowed life. After her husband's untimely demise, Elizabeth travelled around Europe before permanently moving into Chachtice Castle, which was renovated into a new Renaissance style with rich furnishings. During her travels, a year after the Countess lost her husband, her brother, Stephen, passed willing her his Devon castle, a strategic point on the Austrian border. The widow sold the estates to avoid an awkward position, though she never received payments. Many accounts say that Bathery's brutality worsened after her husband's loss, and that her bloodlust was driven by a desire to escape death and remain young. One account stated that after one particularly grueling disciplinary session with a young maid, the Countess had gotten blood on her cheek. Upon cleaning it from her face, she noticed her skin appeared more youthful. Some accounts also said that the screams of the tortured were the only way the Countess could relieve her migraines. She even opened her gyno cum to give her access to higher quality blood, stating that the blood of the commoners didn't have as good of an effect. Accusations and arrest. Rumours of her atrocities spread through the kingdom, and eventually Lutheran minister Istvan Magari made complaints against her both publicly and at the court in Vienna. Finally, in 1610, the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Hungary Matthias II assigned Geology Torzum, the Palatine of Hungary, to investigate. The Countess was then accused of torturing female servants and minor noblewomen, though she would not have been tried for the crimes against the servants as they were seen as property at the time. The torture the victims were subjected to allegedly included the contests of servants, covered the victims' bodies with honey before being left outside for insects to devour as her husband once did. During the winter, the young woman might have been unclothed before being forced into a deadly ice bath. Bathery would drive needles under their nails and cut off their noses or lips. Some victims were whipped with stinging nettles. Bathery was said to bite the shoulders and chests of her victims. Some accounts stated that Bathery and her accomplices would burn the flesh of some victims, including their lower extremities. Though many depictions of Elizabeth mention her bathing in virgin blood or showering, there are no witness accounts to back up this claim, nor is there anything to back up the claims of her drinking the blood of her virginal victims. After 2 long years, on December 31st, 1612, Elizabeth Bathory was found red-handed and arrested along with 4 of her closest servants, who were considered her accomplices to Dorothea Sentis, Ilona Jo, Katerina Benica, and Janos Odveri. All of the women aside from Janos were burnt alive. In contrast, Janos was beheaded before being thrown into the fire due to disease and young age. The blood contest was originally to be sent to a nunnery. However, as account of her actions spread, Her family decided to keep her under strict house arrest. Thurzo wrote the king describing the capture and confinement of Bathery, claiming she was locked in a bricked room, confinement and death. After her confinement in the castle of Cash, she spent the remainder of her life there through written documents from priests dated July 1614. She could move freely and unhindered through the castle, as is the case with house arrest, rather than the confinement. The result claimed. She wrote a will in September 1610, leaving all current and future inheritance possession to her children. Finally, Countess Elizabeth Bathory complained to her bodyguard on the evening of August 20th, 1614, that her hands were cold. In response, he told her to return to bed the following day. The famed blood countess was found dead at 54. Elizabeth Bathory was initially buried in the church of Čachtice on November 25, 1614. Still, according to some sources, due to the villagers' uproar over having the notorious countess interred in their cemetery. Her body was moved to her birth home, and it was then interred at the Bathery family crypt. Today, the location of her body is ultimately unknown, but it is believed to be buried deep in the church area of the Churchtice Castle. However, there are no markings as to where her possible grave could be. Fact or fiction? When it comes to the mysterious Countess Bathery, there is a lot of back and forth as to what is true and what is not. Elizabeth Bathory was a beautiful, well-educated woman who came from a strong family politically, and her power grew in her marriage. That power grew further when her husband passed away, leaving his wealth and estates to her. So it isn't hard to believe that she was instead framed, as much of the testimony in her case was received through torture. I'll let you be the final judge. Do you believe King Matthias II set this up for political reasons, and because he happened to owe the contests a hefty sum of money, or do you think she was set up because she had too much power, or do you believe she was the mastermind behind the purported 650 deaths? Thanks for joining us today as we look back into the gruesome past of humanity on Dillis being Past History, and we will see you next time.